Just about every 3 months or so, the special needs ass clown playing president awakes from his slumber in this fog of self-absorption and does a press conference where he tells us just how great he really thinks he is. The infrequency of the events is only topped by the absurdity of how they actually play out. It never fails. This angry old man that should be playing canasta in an old folks' home shows up with a binder to read from, calls on pre-selected reporters, and rarely ever receives a tough question. Oh, and when he does, he either loses his shit or just blows it off and moves on. Today's press conference was really no different. Biden spent several minutes touting his many supposed bullshit accomplishments, sharing misleading stats, and gaslighting Americans on the many failures of his first year in office. We'll go over a little bit of what that sounds like right after this quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparedness.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparedness.com or hit that link in the description box.
We created 6 million new jobs, more jobs in 1 year than any time before. The unemployment rate dropped to 3.9%. Child poverty dropped by nearly 40%, the biggest drop ever in American history. New business applications grew by 30%, the biggest increase ever. And for the first time in a long time, this country's working people actually got a raise. People, the bottom 40%, saw their income go up.
Now, let me just say that asserting that, quote, this country's working people got a raise would be ridiculously misleading, even if it were true that real wages were up. Did you get a raise? Because I didn't get a raise, and I'm pretty damn sure I'm a working person. The reality is that while wages are up a little bit, that's mostly because service jobs are seeing higher starting pay to fill vacancies. That cashier at McDonald's is getting hired at $12 an hour instead of $9 an hour. And hey, that's all well and good, but that doesn't mean the rest of us got raises, as Biden asserts. Then there's that pesky inflation, which let's just say has left wage growth in the dust, okay? Pretty obvious stuff, folks. In short, the majority of workers in the United States have not gotten a raise. Rather, they are poorer now than they were a year ago, thanks to Biden's disastrous policies. The moron also bragged about his now stagnant job growth, once again, failing to mention that these aren't new jobs being created. We are still far below the pre-pandemic peak for employment. And if we're honest, I don't know Joy Reid could have proceeded over the job growth that we've seen. You see, when the government crushes the economy on purpose, there's only one direction for it to go once restrictions are lifted. That's not a damned accomplishment. And things would be far, far worse if red states weren't out there bolstering the numbers by defying the administration's guidelines. Anyways, once Biden finished his prepared remarks, the tongue bath really began. While the press corps is usually pretty shameless in the regular briefings with Jen Psaki, things go to another level when this drooling moron hits the podium. Biased framing and softball questions were the order of the day once again, and the president was happy to use those opportunities to push more deceit and division, of course.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking of voting rights legislation, if this isn't passed, do you still believe the upcoming election will be fairly conducted and its results will be legitimate?
Well, it all depends on whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this is being set up to try to alter the outcome of the election. And it's one thing, look, maybe I'm just being too much of an optimist. Remember how we thought not that many people were going to show up to vote in the middle of a pandemic? We had the highest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America. Well, I think if, in fact, no matter how hard they make it for minorities to vote, I think you're going to see them willing to stand in line and defy the attempt to keep them from being able to vote. I think you're going to see the people we try to keep from being able to show up, showing up and making the sacrifice it needs to be made in order to change the law back to what it should be. But it's going to be difficult. I make no bones about that. It's going to be difficult. But we're not there yet. We've not run out of options yet, and we'll see how this moves.
Boy, doesn't this seem wildly hypocritical, given that we've just spent the last year being told by this very White House that there was no worse sin than questioning the legitimacy of an election. The irony is unimaginable, yet here we are, with Biden once again pushing the idea that people's votes won't be counted and that voters will be suppressed. They always blame you of doing exactly what they are doing every single time. Now, as Cackles would say, let's be clear, unlike our side in the experience we went through last year, he has no evidence at all that this is going on. Even the most maligned voting reform bill expands access compared to pre-pandemic levels. But Democrats know they're about to get their asses waxed in 10 months and are already looking to build a narrative that the election was stolen from them. Now, later, when Biden was asked about his comparison of Republicans to George Wallace and Bull Connor, he erupted in anger before peeing on America's collective leg and insisting it was raining. Okay, so I know this man is senile, but you'd think he'd be sentient enough to understand that when you accuse someone of being on the side of George Wallace, you are making a direct comparison, equating that person to a racist. That was Biden's intent, no matter how much he tries to whitewash his prior disgusting comments. Also, could one of his handlers please tell him to stop trying to belittle reporters who ask basic questions? In this instance, he tried to accuse the guy of not knowing how to read, even though it's Biden who's lying about what he said. The BS tough guy bravado just comes across as weak, arrogant, and pathetic at this point. The president also made some rather disturbing comments about Russia invading Ukraine, among several other absolutely insane moments, but I just can't cover everything in this one video. In closing, what we saw today wasn't surprising, really, if you think about it. Biden remains the same cowardly, vindictive creep he's always been. Now he'll retreat for another 3 months or so while the rest of the country suffers under his idiocracy. Most of this came by way of redstate.com. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. I agree.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.